Outset Island, the wholesome and peaceful little island village to the far south of the Great Sea. Its inhabitants are blissfully unaware of the hardship in the world. Outset Island was the birthplace of Link, and is the place where he begins his journey. However, unknown to its residents, to the east of its shores, there stands a lonely island. Standing firmly on top of it, a large boulder bearing the face of a person. Destroying this rock reveals a small hole leading into a dark cave. The Earth Temple. The Earth Temple is an ancient site built during the Age of Old, likely right after the events of the Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. The temple was built so that the Zora sage Laruto could pray to the gods in order to power the Master Sword. By the events of the Wind Waker, Medli the Rito, her descendant, had taken up the task of being the Sage of Earth. The Earth Temple, although sharing the name with the temple from Skyward Sword, is nothing alike. The Earth Temple is dark and sinister. The spirits of the dead linger. Pose, Stalfos, and interestingly, ReDeads are all found down here. At first glance, it makes no sense as to why this place is even called the Earth Temple. However, I don't believe the Earth in its name is referring to the physical Earth itself. Instead, I believe it is actually a reference to the dead. In many cultures throughout the world, death is heavily linked to the Earth. We tend to bury our dead under the ground in order to hold the circle of life. With the Earth Temple holding many spirits and bearing the name Earth Temple, it is very likely that the Earth refers to the dead that inhabits its halls. But what actually is the Earth Temple? Well, for starters, we know that it's the location that the Sage of the Earth goes to give prayer in order to power up the Master Sword. However, that doesn't explain why the dungeon is so large and labyrinthian. It doesn't explain why the spirits of the dead and even ReDeads inhabits its halls. So what is the Earth Temple's actual purpose then? Well, that's what we're going to try and discover in today's video. A few months ago, I did research into the horrific experiments that the Shiekah likely performed in the Shadow Temple. I have a link to that video in the description down below, so watch that after this video is finished. It'll make what I'm about to go through clearer. But I'm going to give a quick summary of what I found in that video. I came to the conclusion that the ReDeads from Ocarina of Time were like Hanawa. They were used to capture the souls of the dead when someone dies. The souls of the dead that were captured were more specifically enemies of the royal family. The Shiekah were the ones who carried out these immoral experiments. Later in the video I also suggested that the ReDeads from Wind Waker were the actual corpses of those who were being experimented on due to them being more human-like in appearance and bearing Shiekah tattoos and jewellery. These ReDeads are also found in the Earth Temple. The ReDeads found in the Wind Waker are quite bizarre compared to the others found in the series, mostly because of their one key defining trait, their tattoos and jewellery. Their tattoos share Shiekah motifs, so it's very likely that these ReDeads were once Shiekah. However, that doesn't make sense, does it? In the previous video I made, I theorised that the Shiekah immorally and forcefully experimented on prisoners, turning them into the ReDead. So why would they do it to their own kind? Well, I think the answer is actually very clear. The ReDead in the Wind Waker were volunteers. In my Shadow Temple theory, I suggested that the experiments that the Shiekah carried out were ordered by the royal family. I came to this conclusion due to the heavy amounts of Hyrulean symbolism in the Shadow Temple and the fact that the Shadow Temple is the place known for housing Hyrule's bloody history of greed and hatred. The Shiekah throughout the series are completely loyal to the royal family and the goddess Hylia. They sometimes live for thousands upon thousands of years just to fulfill their missions. Due to this, I personally believe it's very likely that they would give up their humanity and their lives all for the purpose of serving the royal family. That is what I believe the ReDeads in the Wind Waker are, Shiekah volunteers. But what does any of this have to do with the identity of the Earth Temple though? Well, a lot actually. The Earth Temple, unlike some other dungeons in the series, is oddly quiet. It's not a torture site or a deep cavern. The spirits of the dead wander its halls. Coffins are lined up against walls all throughout the dungeon. Large statues that resemble ReDeads and absorb light are found in several of these rooms as well. In fact, this detail about the ReDead statues is very important because it implies one thing: that the dungeon was built with the knowledge that ReDeads would be inhabiting it. In fact, the dungeon kind of glorifies the ReDead. Not only that, but most ReDeads are found resting in peace within coffins. So due to all of this, I believe it's actually quite clear what the true, original purpose of the Earth Temple was. It's a tomb for the ReDeads. A tomb built presumably by the Shiekah or the royal family to honour those Shiekah who gave up their lives to try and solve the secrets of life, now placed here to go about their final days resting in peace. Now there's one thing that you might be typing away at your keyboards about, and that's the fact that ReDeads are not the only things found in the Earth Temple. There are several species inhabiting it, including choo-choos, poes, floor masters and stalfos. If the Earth Temple was only built for the ReDeads, then why are these things found down here? Well, there's actually another simple explanation. We know that sometime between Ocarina of Time and the Wind Waker, Ganondorf moved into the Earth Temple and the Wind Temple in order to kill the Sage of the Earth and the Sage of the Wind. It's very likely that he brought with him members of his army into the dungeon. We know that Jalhalla, the big Poe boss, was probably a part of this army, so that means any Poes found in the dungeon would have been invasive. Stalfos have been known to be a part of his army throughout the series, as they can be found in places such as Ganon's Tower in Ocarina of Time. Floor Masters and Choo-choos are also probably just a part of his army as well. So even though there are different types of enemies in this dungeon, I believe the only ones that were originally located here are the ReDeads. Well, that's it for the theory today. It was a bit of a shorter one, but it wasn't meant to be that long. It's more of an extension of the previous Shadow Temple theory that I made a few months ago, so make sure to use that link in the description below if you haven't seen it, as it really does go more into depth as to why and how the Shiekah created the ReDead. Anyway, with that out of the way, I'll see you next time. Goodbye.